Our second scripture reading continues with Amos 5, verses 21 through 24. Hear the word of the Lord. I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like water, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, imagine for a moment that God shows up one day to our worship service right here in Topeka at First Presbyterian Church. And imagine that before the service is over, God gets up and storms out the door saying, I despise your liturgy and your sermons, and I take no delight in your candles and flowers and paraments and fancy windows. And even though Herman gives a great children's moment, I will not watch, I will not smile and laugh, I will not partake of your coffee and donut holes and fancy treats. Your singing and your prayers nauseate me. And I don't even want to hear your organ and your choir. Well, welcome to the world of Amos, who is not afraid to use shocking images to get our attention. We're making a little shift today in the narrative lectionary. In the Old Testament, we're moving from the history books into the world of the prophets. So we're moving from prose to poetry and from stories to imagery. And the prophets are going to take us all the way through Advent, and then at Christmas, we'll shift again to Jesus and the Gospel of John. Well, Amos is one of the 12 prophets that we call the minor prophets, not because they're unimportant, but we just have fewer and shorter of their writings. And Amos was a rancher, in other words, no seminary training at all, from the southern kingdom of Judah, who went to the northern kingdom of Israel to speak the word of the Lord that he saw, meaning God spoke to him not just with words, but with images. And Amos prophesied during a time when the northern kingdom was at the peak of prosperity, but not everybody shared in it. Their world was much like ours seems to be right now, with kind of a K-shaped economy, with the economically secure doing better and better, and then those who are struggling doing worse and worse. As I mentioned in my weekly email message this week, the notes in my Bible say, Amos's prophecy fits best in a society where there is inequity between rich and poor. Perhaps yesterday some of you caught in the Wall Street Journal an article about how even though military personnel are continuing to get paid, an increasing number of them are relying on food pantries to get by. They were hurting even before the shutdown of the federal government, in part because of the toll it takes when you're deployed and have to move around a lot. It's really hard for your spouse to get a job. It's really hard to find childcare. And this week in the news, we've heard story after story about low-income families wondering how they're going to make it without SNAP benefits. We've seen stories on the news right here in Topeka, the lines for food distributions at local churches and how they've been sometimes 3, 4, and 5 times longer than usual. And in the same week that we've heard that the word affordability was the top issue in a number of local elections nationwide, we've also heard about a record-setting proposed pay package for Elon Musk that will potentially give him up to $1 trillion. So maybe this is a good week to spend a minute or two with Amos. And Amos begins his message with the image of the Lord roaring like a lion, a sound that Amos would have been familiar with as someone who had animals in his care. And it's a sound that can carry for miles. I did not know that. Lions roar in order to intimidate rivals, to locate members of their pride, to sound warnings, and to defend their territory. Why does the Lord roar? Well, in part, as we read in chapter 5, verse 11, because those in power have trampled the poor, ignoring their needs and taxing the grain that they need to live on. So when we come to this startling and shocking image of a God who is so disgusted with the people's worship that he will not watch and will not listen, it might help to imagine for a moment that you're a parent and one of your children gives you an amazing, extravagant gift, like a vacation cabin, or maybe they name a hospital for you, something really big and cool like that. And yet that same child will not even buy a bag of groceries for their brother who is facing homelessness due to job loss and mounting medical debt. How would you feel about that gift if the giver gives it while ignoring and turning their back on another one of your children? That, Amos says, is how God feels when people go to church, spend an hour in worship singing all the songs, saying all the right things about loving God, loving neighbors, and living with purpose, and then go home and back to business as usual without taking that passion for justice with them into their everyday lives. But then Amos gives us another image. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Have you ever seen a waterfall up close before? There's something magical about the way they sound. They're really, really loud and really, really peaceful all at the same time. You probably have a sleep app on your smartphone that sounds like a waterfall. Waterfalls are powerful. They play an important role in purifying the water and adding oxygen to the water below it, allowing a much wider variety of life to flourish. They keep things from getting stale and stagnant and toxic. Waterfalls have a way of drawing us in. People will hike or drive for miles sometimes just to get to a waterfall and sit there and look at it. They're also a major source of renewable energy, although I'm not sure that Amos knew that at the time. What would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like if justice rolled down like water? What would get washed away? What would be reshaped by that powerful force? What new life might flourish if justice rolled down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream? As I read Amos, I am struck by that word, let. Let justice roll down like waters. Justice wants to roll down. Just as water wants to flow freely over a ledge, something has to get in the way in order to stop it. So what is blocking it? Well, here are 3 things that I can see. There are more, but I'm sticking to these 3 because I have personally done all these things at one time or another during my life. And number 1, we stop justice from rolling down like water when we think that working for justice is somebody else's job. It's when we say, I don't have time to call my senator or representative, somebody else can do that. Or, gosh, sure looks like that worker is being taken advantage of, but I don't want to stick my nose in somebody else's business. Or, wow, that racist or sexist joke was totally inappropriate, but I just don't have the energy to call them on it right now. Number 2, we stop justice from rolling down like water when we discount the importance of little things and then fail to do them because it doesn't seem like they really make a difference. For example, in our culture, and we've talked about this before, the amount that we tip the people who provide services for us is a really big deal. It matters whether you tip the people at your favorite restaurant 15% or 20% or 25%, unless they are truly awful and unless all they are doing is handing you your coffee over a counter. 15% is not enough. Another example, it matters that we all participate in our canned protein food drive for Doorstep. Don't let the same people who always bring the food be the only ones who bring the food. I really believe every single one of us needs to be involved in this, even if you are picking up 1 extra can at the grocery store. You know, we do pretty well most of the time when we collect food for Doorstep, but we could be magnificent. We could. We could give so much food that they have more cash on hand to help people with utilities. And maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, but if you've ever gone without power because you couldn't pay your bill and the local organizations like Doorstep ran out of funds, it's a huge deal. And number 3, we stop justice from rolling down when we stop seeking good. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. Seeking is an action. I had somebody say to me last week, I'm tired of praying our all-church prayer. I said, okay, tell me more. Well, we've just said it so much, and I just don't want our church to go on autopilot. And I don't see us doing that at all. In fact, with all of the work our session has been doing in our strategic planning sessions, along with many of you, I would say this church is highly alert. But the person made a valid point. It's easy to just rattle off a prayer without really meaning it. And so whether we're praying the all-church prayer, the Lord's Prayer, or singing the doxology, because we do that every week too, whether we're listening to a beautiful solo or sitting in sacred silence, let us set the intention to be touched and transformed, which is the kind of worship that truly does delight God's heart. And then let us go back to our everyday lives as people who seek good in every face, every place, and every decision. And then stand back, because the justice that rolls down when one person who does that is joined by another and another and another can reshape an entire community with its power.